talking about a topic that many people can relate to. This is, we're going to talk about sexual violence and different forms of oppression, gender oppression, actually, that occurs in our communities, in our society. It's something that many people are struggling with and against. And there's many different ways that people are dealing with it. And this is something that is very prevalent in capitalist societies around the world, not just here in the United States. Um, and 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 so we're going to get into that. But I want to say, welcome back to Free Aslan, and of course, Karena, my co-host. Welcome back to Free Aslan.
Thank you, Joey. I'm so happy to be here again.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been wonderful to have you on. You're like very very good addition to Free Aslan. I just wanted to commend you on everything you're doing and
Oh, thank you.
bringing to the show, bringing to the table. Actually, you
Thank you.
really bring it. So yeah, thank you, Karena, and your understanding, overstanding of revolutionary media and everything that you do outside of Free Aslan as well is very commendable as well. So
Thank you.
we're very happy, very glad to have you. And so I wanted to say another thing that we're going to be talking about is a document from Engels, something that Friedrich Engels published. Believe around 1884, he published this piece, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And this is a very, very important document, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah, this is one of the essentials, and this is considered one of the classics. It's something that there's many different classics, the works of Marx, Lenin, and Mao, and many others, Engels, Stalin, um, Maria Tegui. There's many different
Hmm.
revolutionary theorists that have gave us huge lessons in order to struggle against many obstacles that we continue to face today, even though a lot of these classics were written, over 100 years ago, right? And it's very important. So, this piece, "The Origins of the Family," um, this is something that you know, the family, private property, and the state. This is something that was written by Engels. And let me just talk a little bit about Friedrich Engels. Some of our listeners, some Rasa will say, well, why am I reading about Engels? Like, who is this? Engels, why do I have to read about somebody who ain't even indigenous, who was on the other side of the world or what have you? Well, here's the thing is in order to change the future, we have to study history. We have to understand past lessons, past mistakes, past defeats, past victories. We have to learn from these lessons so that we don't fall victim to them, so that we don't commit the same error. And also, in order to sharpen our political line, our ideology, and understand how we can face obstacles today, obstacles like, U.S. imperialism, patriarchy, national struggles, gender struggles, class struggles. All of these have been fought out over 100 years ago by many great revolutionary theorists. So it's very important that we learn from their battles in order to help our battles today. And it doesn't matter who said it. It doesn't matter what side of the planet. That's very ignorant for people to say, I'm not going to learn from this lesson because this person was on this side of the planet, or a lot of these same people are the same critics who talk about, on this side of the border, of America, I don't care about, but then, but at the same time, They talk about, a lot of these same people talk about that they are interdependent and indigenous, etc. Well, indigenous people didn't recognize this side of the fence or that side of the fence, right? So it's very,
Hmm.
ironic that these
Right.
people would talk like this, and then on the other hand talk about, indigenous this and that. And indigenous people, they actually adopted anybody into their nation and their tribe.
Hmm.
People migrated back and forth, and
Hmm.
they didn't believe. So it's either you don't believe in this side of the fence or that side of the fence
Right.
that's supposed to be man-made and etc. Well, then, when it comes to theory, you should have that same attitude, right?
Right. And then another thing that we have to consider is, um, you know, to address the criticism that we hear all the time about looking at, these primary texts that are critical for study, is that people say, like you said, why are we listening? Why are we talking about Marx? He was a white man, blah blah blah. And so I would just reinforce that the reason that we look at these texts and the reason that we want to read them and study and understand is not because we want to elevate a European thing. It is for the because we need to understand that which we seek to destroy. We need to understand what we need to destroy. We have to understand how it came to be this way, because one of the things that we are fed from the time we are very small, when we are indoctrinated, is we are told that before capitalism, everything was horrible, right? Like capitalism made everything great, made us, have, you know, um, surplus things, things that we enjoy, and so all the things that we're taught to understand, that the things that we enjoy from modern life are somehow a blessing of capitalism. And so we have to understand what systems of life were like before capitalism, the Pan European Capitalist Project came to Turtle Island, because one thing that we have to remember is that not only did um, Europeans come to steal land, they also had to come and destroy a communal ethic that was here on Turtle Island. So, this is another popular question. Why are we looking at communism and socialism? Well, we look to those because our ancestors lived that way. We are suited to live that way. We had lived that way before the Pan European Capitalist Project came to Turtle Island. So, it's not an elevation or glorification of that which is European. It is because we need to understand the system that we live under, so that we can understand how the structures of oppression work, and what different types of political oppression we have as a result of the evolution of these systems, which are now what we're forced to live in. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Garena. That was well put, well said.
thank you.
And when I'll just say, when Engels, when he wrote this piece, Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, it was after the death of Marx. Karl Marx was his close comrade. Many of us have comrades, and imagine one of your comrades passes, moves on to Miklan, to the, the next world, and we're gonna be. This is his comrade in struggle. This was his closest comrade. They operated like a cell. And some of you are familiar with the cell structure and how to organize in a cell, revolutionary cell. They were like a cell, in today's terms. They operated together, they worked together, they created revolutionary theory, revolutionary media, they published works, they attempted to raise consciousness in the people, and move the people closer to the movement for liberation of all people on the planet. And so when Karl Marx passed, one of the things Engels did, is he reviewed many of their works, many of Marx's notes. He had a lot of his writings. They were very close. I think they even lived together for a period, but they were very, very close comrades in struggle. Upon reviewing this stuff is when Engels was inspired to write The Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And this is basically a materialist analysis of, you know, social organizations on the planet, not just for, um, this people or that people on the planet. And I'll just note, and remind some of the listeners, Engels was a communist. He wasn't, he wasn't an environmentalist or this. Well, he was actually all of that, because that's what a communist is. A communist is an environmentalist, fighting for gender, fighting for the national struggle as well. All of the above, all oppression, all over the planet. And this is what Engels did. And so he, took a materialist analysis of social organization on the planet, how people began to organize, how capitalism formed, the early steerings, primitive societies, all of the above. And he looked at it, going back to when people, when private property started, when people started farming, domesticating animals. You have to go way back. You're talking, as indigenous people, at some point, we are interdependent people. So we, you know, as we live today, is nothing how our ancestors lived. Many people, push indigenous way of life very strongly. And then at the same time, they're talking about family first. Well, that's a contradiction, because indigenous people going back thousands of years, they didn't have a concept of the family. It was all about the village. It was they lived communally. They didn't have a thing where I'm going fishing and hunting, and this is for my family. You guys can. They didn't have that. There was no family unit. Of course there was families, but they didn't operate as in I'm going hunting for the family. I'm doing this for my family. They operated in a communal way with the entire village, with the community. We talk about childcare. The children, many of the children were in these schools, in these different school, warrior school, or this school or that school. And so there was no, you stay in the house, I'm gonna go hunting, you stay in the, no. It was a communal way of living, community based. And so, when we look at the family, Ingalls wrote this piece about the family unit, and the beginnings of how people started to do this. Of course, domestication of animals, etc. Um,
Agriculture.
agriculture, absolutely, and this led to, you know, um, it also led to the early beginnings of patriarchy, of male supremacy, and speaking as a male, males, are an oppressor force to women around the world, overall. And that's just how it is. It's been like that from the beginning, from the first time that people came together to hunt. Well, who was the hunters? The men who go out to hunt, who own the quote unquote um, means of production, the tools, the hunting tools. They're the ones that went out and hunted, and therefore they had an advantage over the women, and they used it to their advantage. And ever since, even when private property came into play, men began to, be the dominant force in this, where women were steered to the home, to do the cooking and the child rearing and taking care of children and breeding, etc. Um, and so the men were out doing these things and acquiring different resources, and this gave them the advantage that even today we see is still intact. And this is why women don't make the same as men, and many other things. um, and so but Engels, he pointed this out, about the early steerings of, not only private property, but then patriarchy, and of course capitalism. And males have always been at the forefront of this, and also the oppressors. And this is why women have a special place. This is why, in my opinion, women, any kind of struggle, you could look at any struggle in the world, whether we're talking about socialist revolution, whether we're talking about a nationalist struggle, whether we're talking about, in the hood, we could talk about prison. What, let me, some of the listeners are familiar with prison. What struggle, what prison movement is not dependent on women? There's no lumpen organization that is not dependent on women. And this is why many times when we see these roundups and these sweeps, there's always women involved. Without women in any battle, in any struggle, in any organization, um, it would not exist. And so, but going back to Engels, like,
Yeah,
what are some of the things, the lessons that you learned from this
sure.
piece?
Thank you. So, as you mentioned, the lens through which this analysis is done is a tool of historic materialism, and so, in using historic materialism, he's showing us that what the transition was from more ancient societies, which were organized around children were identified principally by the mother, right? So there wasn't a for example, there was a much in matriarchal societies. This is when
Mm,
with indigenous matriarchal societies, we know that doesn't mean there's a dominant woman. There's an oppressive female. Of course, it is a more of a balanced system, and that's referred to as a matriarchal system. Through this study, it's kind of he's also picking up on the work of a scholar named what's his name, Morgan, sorry,
oh,
Lewis
there you
Morgan.
go. Yeah.
And Morgan was an anthropologist. So this historic materialism is coupled with kind of a economic anthropology, I would say, based on this scholar's work. And what it also shows is that um, when there, for example, the development of societies, when agriculture begins, people start accumulating things, and then it becomes important to pass those things on and keep them within the gens or the family unit. And so when you have a matrilineal systems that are more balanced and the children belong to the mother and are traced through the mother, it's more difficult to control private property because you don't have a clear system of inheritance, right?
Mm,
So the basis for this kind of law, he points out, is Roman law, which was based on the idea of your property is yours to use and abuse. So I'm not going to tell you what the Latin term for that was. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But basically, the Roman view of property was something that is your property is yours to use and abuse.
mm,
So when the need comes in to protect where your accumulation of goods is going, specifically through a patrilineal line, that's when you see the replacement of a patriarchal law replace matrilineal systems. And
mm,
so this is important for men to make sure that the accumulation of their goods, aka the accumulation of their wealth, their property, is passed on and preserved through their specific family line. And so that's how the shift came to um, uh, law that favored patriarchy. And it also shows the breakdown of how this specific family unit that we're discussing under capitalism, the purpose of it was as an economic unit. And the
mm,
purpose of it was to convert and to secure systems of control, right? So what allowed the man to go out and work as a slave wage earner is presupposing that the woman is going to be restricted to the home,
mm,
and so that because she is by default part of his property, she is part of his family, And so the use and abuse idea carries over to that as well. I will quote here, I will read a couple of paragraphs here from the chapter 2 in the family, section 4, which kind of speaks to the really specific point that we're getting at here about how private property under capitalism gives way to an exploitative family unit that serves as an economic unit of power and control, right? So let's look at a couple of paragraphs here about the family, where he says, sorry, he says, in regard to marriage, the law, even the most advanced, is fully satisfied as soon as the partners have formally recorded that they are entering into marriage of their own free consent. What goes on in real life behind these judicial scenes, how this free consent comes about, that is not the business of the law and the jurist. And so he talks about how systems of consent for marriage also changed under the system of patriarchy. And he says that the first division of labor is between the man and the woman when they had children in this particular economic unit that comes out as a result of capitalism. And he also says that in this sense, the woman becomes the proletariat of the family, of the economic unit. And that sets that means by default, you are to be used and abused, as Roman law said. Your property is to use and abuse how you see fit.
An exploited worker. And that's very interesting because, when I was in the concentration camp and in our study group, we were going over doing a deep study on the lumpen population. And one of the things that we discussed was, just like Engels, that not only we went deeper than Engels, we kind of dug deeper, where we said we agreed that yes, the woman, we're looking at the family unit, analyzing the family unit because we're discussing the lumpen. And we agreed with Engels that the mother was the proletariat, but we dug deeper than Engels. We built on Engels, and we also stated that the children are the lumpen.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about it. The child doesn't have money coming in. The child depends on handouts from the mother and father. Give me $5 a week or what have you, buy me my clothes.
And children are also free labor for
children are super exploited.
Right.
So it's really remarkable that Engels, I didn't even know at the time when you just reminded me, but at the time that we did this deep study of the lumpen, I hadn't known that Engels had identified the mother as the proletariat, and I believe and we looked at the children as the lumpen because they don't get paid, like you said, exploited labor.
And one thing that this study serves to clarify as well is that this certain type of family oppression is specific to the conditions of capitalism. It is not something that has always existed forever and always. It is not how more older societies existed. These conditions are specific to the development of the need to protect private property, and also for when we have these civilizations where you start accumulating things, well, then the ones who have the weapons are going to fuse into the state, and then the state is going to control and enforce all these systems and control and oppression over your economic block now, which is your economic family unit. If the family unit is now an economic property system of control, it explains how this is not forever and always. This is not human nature. This is specific to the conditions of capitalism.
And then getting into patriarchy, Engels kind of led us to the threshold of patriarchy. And then looking at patriarchy today, it manifests in different forms, right? One of the forms that patriarchy, of course, it's the male domination over women and et cetera, everything that goes with that. But we can also, and I think you could probably analyze every relationship and find elements of patriarchal, you know, behavior, and it's ingrained in, you have to, we grow up, we're born and raised in a capitalist society. So even though we fight, it's a constant struggle. We are all affected by it, including revolutionary people. But patriarchy, I'll just note, also gives birth to the topic of today, sexual violence, right? This is, one of the, at the forefront of patriarchy, sexual violence, the violence of men, inflicting violence on women. And this is one of the manifestations, and it's horrible. So when we look at it in its totality, we see that, today we see many forms of violence, men against women. We trace that to patriarchy. We then look at patriarchy. We can trace that to the beginnings of capitalism and private property. We can go to private property and trace that, um, back into, the origins of the family.
Right.
So it all stems to, and that's the thing that, another thing, this is why it's very important to study the classics, right? On the one hand, you have people saying, well, I'm against, patriarchy and, male, and but I'm against, anything European. This is what we got to understand. Theory is theory. There's a saying, Mim had said 2 plus 2 is 4, no matter who said it.
Right.
I don't care if, the person was from New Zealand. If they said 2 plus 2 is 4 equals 4, then it's 4. And so, and I always get a kick out of how some of the most, the loudest, critics of all things, outside of indigenous territory, are the same people that are arguing their argument. Why are you using theory that was created on this side of the world or that side? And they're explaining this in the English language.
Right.
Which is ridiculous. That's Eurocentrism. The language you're speaking is Eurocentrism.
So what? Just read
Stop. Like it's crazy. I mean, it's just incredible. But if you have any more to add, because we're gonna have to.
Yeah, I'll just say we're gonna start it. But I just, as far as recommended reading, of course, read the whole thing. But if you just want to, if you don't want to read the whole thing, then please read chapters 1 through 3, and then the last chapter. So again, that's Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State. Read chapters 1 through 3, and then the last chapter.
Friedrich Engels, right? Okay, perfect. And we're gonna go to a short break. We're gonna listen to a song, take you guys back to the times you were cruising. You know what? This are you dedicating this to Des? Are you?
Okay, this is dedicated to my comadre Desiree Rojas.
All right.
Hello. Joey, are you there?
And and this is KEXU 96.1, and we're back here at Free Aslan. Welcome back, Garena, and thank you
Gracias,
for call.
Joey. Happy to be here.
Absolutely, and so we're gonna get into this next interview that we have. I just wanted to I wanted to say this. Sister Desiree had a um, had a land acknowledgement, that I wanted to read, and it was very important. It's something that we should always start off Radio Free Aslan with, and I'll read it at the end. But let me get to this. Um, let me get to this next interview, and I just want to welcome. I want to welcome our sister Aurelia Lorca. Welcome, sister, to Free Aslan.
Hello, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
could hear you perfectly.
Okay.
Absolutely. And
Hello?
yeah, and we want to talk to you. You have a story. You have some a beautiful poem that you're going to share with us. And
Mhm.
just briefly, very briefly, if you could tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Some of them may not know who you are, sister.
Well, my name is in recognition of all of the things that you were just talking about in your last segment. And the poet Federico Garcia Lorca, who was killed for
Mm.
challenging patriarchy,
Wow.
who was killed for challenging feudalism,
Mm.
challenging colonization,
Mm.
and standing up for women. Just he was killed for so many things, but also moving outside of capitalism. And he has a play. His last play was unfinished. It was called Dreams of My Cousin Aurelia.
Mm.
And it was actually the only play that he ever wrote that was based on his own life. And it was about, he had really a cousin named Aurelia.
Wow.
And he said that she lived in literature because the men in the village never laughed.
Mm.
And it was his, it was his statement about women wanting to find stories around them. And then his intentions for the character was for her to receive a cathartic slap in the face and face the present, because she was just totally in literature. And he was assassinated at the beginning of the Geddes abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also doing a nod in that play. I fully believe he's also doing a nod in that play to Gerard de Nerval, the surrealist writers Aurelia and Sylvie, where he feels like he knows that that there's something. I feel like he knew he was going to get killed.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I almost feel like, at least the way I read it, is that he was waiting for someone to pick it up.
Mm. Wow.
I mean, not literally his cousin, because there was such a gag order. You couldn't talk about this history, but I almost felt like it was, when I read about this play, I was like, oh, it's almost like he's asking for someone to pick it up.
Mm.
And coming from an erased history, both my own personal history and coming from a family that says, we don't talk about the past. We don't talk about the past.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are very, it just really speaks to me.
Right.
And it's like, how do you find the language to talk about it? Because you need the collective, you need people, you need to hear stories, you need to be able to understand the larger history it's connected to.
Oh. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I almost feel like there's certain things I wasn't able to write or talk about until now.
Oh.
But
Well,
I started writing under the name Aurelia Lorca in 2013.
Wow.
So,
And that's interesting that you use Aurelia and Lorca. But let us hear this poem, sister, this beautiful poem that you want to share with us today.
So this is called La Petenera, That Ungrateful Girl. And I wrote it a couple of years ago. And La Petinetta, that ungrateful girl. This lability, this oh so quiet army of me, driving with my mother behind the wheel and the emergency light goes on, seeing my father in the hospital with the face of his dead twin, deflecting demonic ghosts who bite. Never mind terror leader standing next to the most dangerous gangster of the 21st century. What poetry is in any of this fuckery? Sometimes I go back to Prufrock's refrain and the women in the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo, and I think about the pair of ragged claws I should have been. The voices mandate, isn't it time to grow up already, you ungrateful girl, punch through the labyrinth and forget? But I am that mermaid who won't stop singing ballads to continually disturb the universe. I dream of peaches, the sweetness dripping from my fingers, because cynics with a pen are optimists in disguise who write God into existence.
And when what is this poem speak to you? Because poems, like anything,
Gender constructs.
And what was that?
Gender constructs.
Okay,
Gender constructs. Wow. Yeah.
Gender constructs. Absolutely about gender constructs and gender constructs and the stigmas of being haunted and not being able to talk about it.
And I would imagine that many women would be haunted with things that they cannot speak about. And what are some of the reasons why women can't speak about certain things that haunt them? What can be the reasons for that, sister? Like, why?
So first of all, when we talk about things like trauma, violence, the traumatic act, especially sexual violence, which is so stigmatized. Murder is also connected to sexual violence. However, sexual violence has such its own unique stigmas around it for victims, and the traumatic act itself robs victims of language. And so therefore the traumatic experience is traumatic because there's no words to describe it. The poet Ovid wrote of these things 2,000 years ago in the Metamorphosis. Philomela is not only brutally raped by Tereus, her brother-in-law, she was raped by him again after he removed her tongue. Literally, he cut out her tongue. She still told her story in images in a tapestry that she sent to her sister Procne. Upon learning of what happened to Philomela, Procne was said to feel pain and rage that transcended language. The sisters end up killing Aedeus, Tereus' son, serving his body to him for dinner, and then throwing his head at him when he asked for him. So this act, the physical act even, shows how the responses to trauma are stigmatized, whether it's the fight response, the flight response where you run away, the fawn response where you become people-pleasing, and then the freeze response, which is coercive control and like, why didn't you fight? Of course I didn't fight. Tereus is a warrior. He cut out my tongue. He has a sword. It's just any kind of response is stigmatized because just being a victim of sexual violence is so stigmatized. In ancient times, in ancient times, if in Judaic law, before the tribes were still wandering, before they found kingdoms, if you raped a virgin, you had to marry her. Just terrible. Think about it.
Wow.
And so that also has become, it's just being a survivor of sexual violence has such a stigma to it. Just being alive. It's worse than death. And then there's no language for it because it's all stigmatized. And I think that there's this whole thing of, oh yes, I'm forgiven, I've moved on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That reminds me, Aurelia, that just reminded me of the story where I think Dinah is raped, and then she has to her brothers go back and seek vengeance from the guy who raped her because
Yeah.
she doesn't. Right, exactly.
Tamar.
Yes,
It's
yes.
Tamar, and she's King David's stepdaughter,
Mhm.
and her older brother, who's really her half brother, or maybe even not even her real brother, because she's David's second wife's daughter.
Mhm.
He wants his father's kingdom, so it's all about materialism.
Right.
It's all about property, just like you said. And Amnon rapes Tamar. After he rapes her, she begs him to marry her, not because she loves him, but because what he's done to her has ruined her and left her desolate. And he throws her out and calls her crazy and delusional and treats her like a whore.
Mhm.
And that in itself is a worse crime. It's a crime unto itself, not a worse crime. I mean,
Right.
it's another rape. It's the
Exactly.
tearing out the tongue.
Right.
And I think what the problem is that it's been 3,000 years and Tamar's still waiting to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And this ties into understanding the sovereignty of not just the female body, but the sovereignty of our voice and the sovereignty of understanding the way that we respond to trauma. Mm-hmm. And especially within, if you're raised within the Judeo-Catholic tradition, Catholicism says sex is sacred. And so then what happens? There's the fawn response. Oh, I think I love him, because you're also told you're supposed to forgive your enemies. You're supposed to love. You're not supposed to be angry. You're not supposed to decapitate your nephew and throw his head at his father for raping you. That's in the Ovid in Greek mythology. You're not supposed to be violent. You're not supposed to be violent in word. You're not supposed to have any kind of response. You're just not supposed to respond. You're just supposed to forget it happened. You're just supposed to move on. And this bullshit. And this whole thing about restorative justice being a solution for sexual violence, especially sexual violence that goes back into childhood, the justice system is not victim-centered, and neither is the restorative justice system.
I really sorry.
It's a big problem.
I was just going to mention, Aurelia, I really like what you just said about forgiveness, because I think that's another thing that we are conditioned to believe, that we are not able to heal unless we forgive the other person first. And I'm not sure
but the forgiveness is central. Yeah. The forgiveness begins not forgiving the person that's wronged us. It's forgiving ourselves for responding the way that we did.
Exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
that part.
That's the forgiveness. The forgiveness is I'm going to forgive myself.
Right.
Because there is accountability. There is accountability that should come into play at some point. People have to be held accountable. And
accountable. It's okay. This is what I think, and I'm gonna use this analogy and just hear me out. Okay. Remember the movie, the book, The Princess Bride?
Yes.
With David Bowie.
So at the end, the drug pirate Robert Wesley. He says, Humperdinck is the epitome of, the entitled, murderous, predatory, manipulative white man. He doesn't even really love Buttercup. He's just marrying her so he can kill her and then start a war so he can be even more of a king. He's a awful guy, right? So Wesley says to him, to the pain, and he doesn't harm him. He threatens him, but he doesn't harm him. And he says, to the pain is just to sit there in your cowardice. And it's carceral punishment. We know that carceral punishment does not work. And it's this is what you are. This is what you did to me. This is what you did to me. This is what you are. Go. Timso, thou mayest. Cain has the mark of Cain for being a murderer. Well, rapists, people who victimize a little girl and put a plastic bag over her head, leave bite marks on her inner thighs, where her mother cannot see, but it'll be a reminder of what he did to her. Someone who threatens that little girl throughout her childhood and continues to victimize her until her adulthood. Yeah, there's a word for that. Rapist. Mm-hmm. That's what you are. Mm-hmm. There it is.
Yeah.
And don't shit in my hand and call it a cupcake. And that's it. And that's just, the stigmas need to be removed for women. But this is not about vengeance. This is not about revenge. Although it is kind of funny to think I'm a Spanish brat with an overdeveloped sense of vengeance. No, this is not revenge. And I don't think that victims really want revenge. They just want to be able to tell their story without fear. And then not have to live in fear, not have to worry. Because oftentimes, rapists, people who do these kinds of things will threaten. You know, I was threatened throughout my childhood. I had a finger pointed between my eyes, exactly like E.T. does to Elliot at the end of the movie E.T. And I was told, I'll be right here. Remember what I told you, never tell. And his hand would always be turned into a gun. That's why I've been having a dream of having a bullet in my third eye for decades.
Oh, that's terrible.
This is, it's just like, we want to be safe. We want to not get killed. We want people to believe us. And we also just, that's it, just to be able to tell our stories and not be called delusional and crazy.
And Aurelia,
and also, if there's going to be restorative practices, let the victim initiate it, because it does make us a little crazy. Not crazy. It gets us really upset, especially when we get phone calls where we don't know how, our names were given out.
And let me just ask you, Aurelia. Let me just ask you, what do you think is missing today with somebody who has been sexually abused? What is lacking, or is there anything lacking when it comes to people who have been sexually abused?
What's lacking is people don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear it. People don't know how to hear it. People are like, "Oh, I'm triggered," especially if they're abusers themselves. I mean, the abusers, of course, are like, "You're too angry. I can't hear it." And it's like, no, you did this. Sex without consent is called rape. If someone's too afraid to say no, that's not consent. And it's just what's missing is people being able to listen.
Right.
And it's also ego. And it's also people are afraid because there's such a punitive system. Oh, you do this, you're socially ostracized, and etc. And it's like cancel culture and call out culture is really problematic. But at the same time, if someone has been violent and manipulative and continues to be manipulative and continues to show the same behavior for 40 years, and then that's the problem.
Right.
Then it's not call out. It's more like, okay, this is what you did. This is what you are. And there it is. Because violence cannot be a solution. Yeah. Carceral punishment cannot be a solution. But it's just like, learn to listen. And can I drop an F-bomb on the radio? Learn to fucking listen.
Whoa.
And if someone's angry, think about why. Separate the behavior from the person. Where have I heard that before? Separate behavior from the person. If someone is saying that they feel like they have a plastic bag over their head and they keep saying that metaphor over and over again, maybe it's because that's what you did to them when they were a child. And yes, I'm using a second person because I hope I'm being heard.
Yeah, I love that example that you just used about not being able to say no does not mean consent either, because it's interesting how the legal standard has arisen around sexual crimes, because it's like, it's not like somebody can stab you and just because you didn't stop them, you can say I consented to being stabbed.
That's a good example.
So I'll give you an example.
Wow.
The person who victimized me throughout my childhood into adulthood met with me, and then within 30 minutes of seeing me said, "You poor traumatized woman, I'm so sorry for what I've done," and pressed up against me with an erection. And because I didn't want to report it, I'm not, I just wanted to have a conversation. And, SFPD will not investigate a sexual battery. If he had stabbed me,
right,
the statute of limitations wouldn't have lasted, but I would have had to prove it. But it's just still, it's really traumatizing. It's not nice, and it's kind of scary considering the history.
Yeah, re-traumatizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's
obvious. And the accountability is not there, and it's just like, okay, well, that person is not. It's not even about being sick. It was a deliberate act to degrade, humiliate, control.
Right, and somebody who does that, rapes somebody and 40 years later rubs up on them like that, the person obviously has not learned.
Up told 20 years ago too. Yeah.
Yeah, the person is obviously not learned and not changed and not, you know, have transformed in any ways, and that's crazy. And you know, we're running out of time now, though, sister. And you know, I would really like you to come back. We want to hear. You have some beautiful writings. You have some great writings. You also have a book, right? You know. The If you want to talk a little bit about your book, we got like 2 minutes.
No, I don't have a book yet. I have another poem.
Oh,
You want me
Okay.
to read it?
Okay.
Okay. Wait.
Mm.
Where you hear my story matters. In some places I mean purity. In others I signify death and apples. Though I am soiled, I do not have to be evil. I am knowledge. My only evil is in what you choose to do with me. Wisdom says I never taste as good after the first bite unless I am baked, turned into a pie. The fairest in the land is always the biggest myth of all. To police gender is to police the land. Something was taken from me long ago, but why regard me as ruined? The huntsman refused to cut out my heart. Yes, I was poisoned, but raccoons stole from the foxes to keep me clever. The words arrived arid and sparse while the moon hid in my stomach the noiseless vibrations of poetry, jabbing the bitch-haired gears into a knife's edge and conflating all morphemes into a euphonic sonata, a sonorous symphony where nothing mattered except the lull of vowels until I was woken from my dreams by a kiss I never asked for.
Mm.
Thank you.
Wow. And that was powerful,
Thank you
sister.
for sharing
And
that.
yeah, thank you. And I know this is hard. We've run out of time, sister, but I just want to say it takes a lot of courage for somebody to speak up when this has gone on, you know, and we've had people on here before, and we know that it's very difficult. And it shows that you are a very strong warrior. And you know, and you know, thank you for opening up. I know that this is very traumatic to even talk about something like this. It's horrible. And we just want to say that we stand with you here at Free Aztlan, sister. Anytime you want to come back, anything you want to share, anything you want to talk about or address, you have a platform here to do it. We stand by you. We are against these predators 200% and we just want to say that you know, we love you here, sister, and we stand by you all the way. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurelia.
I mean, there's a part of me that's like hearing how angry I am, and I want, again, and that's also gendered, you know, don't be an angry woman. Don't be angry.
No.
And it's like,
No.
how can I not be?
Yeah.
No, not
If
at
you
all.
ain't
How
angry,
can
something's
I be?
wrong.
How can I not
That's
be?
all I gotta say. If you ain't angry, something is wrong, and not just you,
The
sister, but
audience.
everybody. If we're
Yeah.
not angry in this society that stole our land, genocided our people, committed atrocities, raped and killed and pillaged, something is definitely wrong with you if you're not angry. We're very angry at Free Aztlan. On that note, sister, thank you. We've run out of time.
Thank you
Free
so much.
Aztlan. Oh,
Oh,
Mateo.
Mateo. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Mm.
Tahui. Bye bye. Thank you.